Hello, everyone. Um, we're going to get started in just a second. Okay. Woo. Hi, welcome. As we begin, I'm going to ask you all if you have the ability, grab a journal, maybe a piece of paper, and a pen. Also, hello again. Welcome to Abortion and Black Queer Liberation, a workshop on how abortion and reproductive justice are an essential part of Black liberation. Let's go. Space access and engagement. So we have live ASL interpretation on this call and automated captions. Hopefully you can see at least our interpreter right below me or maybe to the side of me, depending on your Zoom setup. Yeah, so if you need captions, there's a button that should say either show captions or maybe it might be in the more section. You can click that and it should be able to just show you what I'm saying. We're also dropping a file with a rough transcripts and slides so that people can catch up. So sorry about not having live caption services, but we're trying to adapt. An edited recording will be available tomorrow with up-to-date captions. Please, if you have any access issues, please flag them in the chat in the chat publicly or to Sierra specifically. Let's say you like interpretation, you can't see it, captions aren't working, you want me to slow down, all of that, message Sierra or message the chat. We're also going to be using the Q&A buttons to ask questions. So maybe at the bottom of your screen, you might see the button that says Q&A. If you have a question, please type it out there and either I or Sierra will be able to answer that. We're gonna pause for Q&A at the end of each section. But yeah, you can feel free to drop questions at any time. Also, please use the chat and reactions to engage with folks, share resources. Fair warning, gotta give this disclaimer. Don't be rude or disrespectful to me or any speakers that we have in the chat or Q&A. Trying to get a reaction out of me or anyone here will not work. You're simply gonna be kicked from the call. If the chat gets bad, it can always be turned off. So keep that in mind. So hi, I'm Lotus. I am a Black trans guy, a college student, an intern at the Abortion Fund of Ohio. I'm so excited to be here with y'all today. Um, I have a prompt for you all. I see a lot of you have seen it, gotten it. If you feel comfortable sharing, you can say your name, your pronouns, any organizational affiliation you might have, and your favorite snack. That one's actually the most important one. Um, yeah. About the Abortion Fund of Ohio. So if this is your first AFO event, welcome. Second off, here's a little introduction to who we are, what we do here. Um, AFO started in 1992 as Women Have Options and Abortion Fund, and it also had a connected transportation to abortion service. About a year after the Abortion Fund was founded, it's and 21 other regional abortion funds came together to form the National Network of Abortion Funds, or NANAF, as I'll be referring to it today. Today, NANAF, or the National Network of Abortion Funds, consists of over 100 independent abortion funds from across the US. We'll hear some more from folks at NANAF later. In 2021 and 2022, Women Have Options changed its name from that to Abortion Fund of Ohio in order to reflect the wide range of people who have abortions and deserve access to abortions. As for the services that AFO offers, there's direct aid, funding for abortion care, as well as practical support funds for things like childcare and transportation. There's also judicial bypass support, which is helping minors who want to access abortion services. There's also distributing emergency contraception, free Plan B, free condoms, free lube, all of it. We also hold events like this, trainings, tabling, and we also work to bust abortion stigma. As you can see, as you might be able to see on the screen, in 2023, we raised over $1 million in direct abortion funding. And so that's just amazing. Yeah. Okay, so before we get into this workshop, we're going to be talking about some of the content that's here. This workshop talks about the history and legacies of oppression. So we will be talking about real harm that has happened and is happening to Black and Indigenous, queer, and trans people. So many parts here have the potential to be triggering. Everything really awful is talked about super briefly, but be aware things could be triggering. Please take care of yourself however you need to. This is a Zoom call, so it's easier to just turn off the sound, grab a snack, leave the call, do something else for a few seconds. Whatever you need to do, no judgment. General warnings for American history of oppression, enslavement, eugenics and genocide, harm to queer and trans, Black and Indigenous folks, miscarriage and pregnancy loss, anti-Black violence, misogyny, transphobia, policing, and sexual violence. Disclaimer. And a final set of disclaimers. This workshop is not medical advice. It won't be providing medical advice. It's also not providing legal advice. We will discuss current historical methods of inducing abortion. This is not an endorsement of those methods, nor is it a condemnation. We do, in general, endorse abortion. If and how and when and why you get an abortion should be up to you. So keep that in mind. Woohoo! Okay, table of contents. On the agenda today, right now, we have introduced the space. We're going to get into a Black history of abortion in the United States. Then we're going to talk about getting free, the road to reproductive justice, which is going to be talking more about Black feminism and its relationship to queer liberation struggle. Then finally, we're going to talk about practical ways that you can get involved, creating the future that we know is going to happen for Black queer folks accessing abortion. And yeah. Abortion and terminology. I'm going to wait a second for the interpreter to switch out. Sorry.
We're ready.
Okay, great. Intentional language. So if you're here, you're most likely familiar with abortion on some level, but for some clarity, here's a definition. Here, abortion is defined as when a pregnancy is intentionally ended through some means. If you're thinking, who can have abortions? The answer is many people. If a person has a uterus with eggs, more than likely that person can become pregnant and have an abortion. So that includes many cisgender women, many trans men, many non-binary people, and many intersex people. Yeah. There are many types of abortion, and we're going to talk about some of them, but one thing that will come up a few times is self-managed abortion. What is considered self-managed abortion varies, but for this workshop, it means abortion services accessed outside of a clinic or hospital. Often people are referring to taking something like the abortion pill at home without the help of a doctor. But when talking about Black history, we're going to be talking about a wide range of ways people accessed abortion before medical services and when medical services were inaccessible. We'll also be talking about abortifacients and contraceptives. To keep things simple, abortifacients are substances which induce abortion. These include things like the abortion pill, but also include things like herbs, for instance. There are also contraceptives, which are things that prevent pregnancy, like condoms or birth control. We're not going to get too caught in the weeds with what is and what's not, but when we're talking about the history of these things, know that the line between what was an abortifacient and what was a contraceptive was much blurrier than it is today. Yeah. Oh, and we're going to be talking about reproductive health and reproductive violence. That impacts all people regardless of anatomy. Reproductive health refers to the physical, mental, and social well-being of things relating to reproductive organs, pregnancy, STI care, hormone health, sex and sexuality, family planning, abortion access, all of it, and so much more. Based on that, reproductive violence here is interpersonal or governmental violence that limits a person's reproductive autonomy or coerces them into making choices that they don't want to make. Something like that will come up quite a bit. Gendered language. So we know that when looking at the history of Black folks and Indigenous folks, we know that so many peoples were forced into this strict gender binary. With the experiences of enslaved people in particular, it was financially really important to ensure that people with certain characteristics were characterized as women, and others that had different characteristics were characterized as men. Those who didn't fit in for a variety of reasons were often met with violence and denial. All that in mind, I just try to be as specific as possible with my language. When I mean people who were coercively identified as women, I'll say people identified as women. Sometimes I'll talk about women's groups, which come up, which of course, that concept of a women's group should not be taken uncritically. Has that group excluded trans women? Why is that? What does that say about their politics? All questions that you should ask when kind of hearing about these groups. Sometimes clips I'll play won't be as specific as I am, and that point blank sucks, but usually I'll clarify. So I'll also be saying things like people and women seeking abortions or just people seeking abortions. Okay. Any questions so far? Um, I know we haven't like gotten really into it, but we're gonna move on. So today I'll be sharing a brief, very, very brief look into the Black US history of abortion access and care from pre-colonial West Africa to today. So let's start with pre-colonial indigenous practices, or the ways that people who are native to lands in West Africa, or what is now known as, and or people who are native to lands that are now known as America, thought of abortion before European and American exploitation. Um, what we know is largely because of early expeditions of European clergy or explorers, colonizers who, despite keeping really good records of their travels, were super uninterested in like what abortion practices were about, what they meant to these people, because they didn't like these practices. What we do know is that abortion was common with people indigenous to West Africa and with people indigenous to the United States, just like it was common in Europe. As for how abortion was accessed, people would either have someone in a community with specialized knowledge, or there would be known techniques in a given community. What these strategies were varied greatly, and a lot of that knowledge that we would have has been intentionally destroyed by the process of colonization. But we still know a lot through oral histories and traditions being carried on for centuries. So we know what happened before, but we have to, of course, get into Middle Passage and the enslavement of millions of African people in the United States, Caribbean, and South America. So what does abortion look like on the plantation? To answer that, we're about to hear from Loretta Ross, one of the 12 founding mothers of reproductive justice and a premier Black abortion historian. Without her work in so many ways, this workshop would not be possible. So we're going to hear from her.
Well, you can't talk about the United States without talking about the the genocide against Native Americans and the enslavement of kidnapped Africans to work here as a workforce. I mean, our racialized capitalist system was created on genocide and exploitation, and yet the kidnapped African women actually brought to America considerable knowledge about birth control and abortifacients that they knew on the continent. And so they began to use those as a way to restrict their own fertility, even as they became Christianized and were told that these things were sins. There were white doctors who had investigated entire plantations where the birth rate was not what the plantation owners wanted. And they surmised that there was some secret that Black women knew to control their fertility. And these white doctors were studying why, under some owners, Black women were having plenty of children and why, under others, they were not. So it was secret knowledge that was here in the United States in the hands of Black women.
So, as Loretta Ross said, people identified by their oppressors as women often had abortions in secret. However, after around 1807, when the international slave trade was outlawed, meaning more people could not be taken from Africa and put to work in the United States, slave owners became really, really invested in seeing the people that they had enslaved as breeders who would create more slaves, which then would create them more profits. Um, we more than likely know that slavery already created really horrible conditions for any sort of reproductive health, but this period is really accurately described as a state of complete sexual terrorism. Slavers would force enslaved people to have sex with them, force enslaved people to have sex with other enslaved people, and in response to like people who did not go with that, they would either legally try or physically harm, whip those who step out of line. Um, Here, abortion really becomes a tool of asserting your own freedom. Slavery is a horrible condition to have a baby in, and especially knowing that your child will be put to work and then also more than likely sexually exploited. You do not, many people do not want to have children, despite what, you know, their masters would tell them, right? And so people have this, they have their own methods of accessing abortion, even when that was not allowed. Um, you have the story from Mary Gaffney after the Civil War. I'm going to read it. When formerly enslaved woman named Mary Gaffney refused to sleep with her husband, he complained to the master and she was whipped. After that, Mary relented, but as she explained, she still, quote, cheated the master. I never did have any slaves to grow, and master, he wondered what was the matter. I kept cotton roots, and I chewed them all the time, but I was careful not to let the master know or catch me. She went on to have several healthy children after the abolition of slavery, once her children were beyond slavery's grasp. So, as you can see from that clip, slave owners began to recognize many of the most accessible methods of abortion access and punish people for using them severely. Um, and people, including people who like provided abortifacients, were badly whipped or legally tried for disrupting the property of these owners. Okay, I think we're gonna take a quick, really quick break. Um, See you in like 2 minutes, we'll say, at like 7:24 if you're in Eastern Standard Time. Oh, and small reminder, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A tab. Thank you. We're gonna get started back up in a few seconds. Okay, so here's this timeline of some 100 years of Black history. um, as you can tell, after the abolition of slavery, people's experience become super diverse and people have a lot of stuff going on. So we are going to try and briefly address some of what I think are really interesting points. Again, if you have questions about any of these things or anything that you might have heard, please ask away. I think we'll start with in the 1860s. So Black women's clubs are formed to combat racism and address health disparities of Black women and Black people in general. These groups are often kind of disregarded as like a kind of political force today because of their tendencies towards respectability politics and counting out like poorer members, less sightly members, which often included things like homophobia, queerphobia, but also they were pillars of their communities. And if you needed access to a medical service, including abortion, they were the people to go to. And then jump to the 1920s, many Black organizations, including Black leaders, Black papers, churches, church officials, and organizations tended to discuss birth control and how Black communities needed it. They needed the support. They wanted that autonomy. They discussed that openly. And privately, they would often serve as connectors to abortion services. I think one of the most maybe not necessarily, I guess I want to say important aspects of this is in 1925, when the National Urban League asked the Birth Control Federation of America, which would later become Planned Parenthood, to open a clinic in the Bronx to support the Black community's access to birth control there. And we're going to jump to the 1940s when throughout, since the beginning of slavery, but also through until around the 1960s, granny midwives, which were Black midwives in the South who did much of the birth and abortion services for folks in the South, were really the way that people got access to reproductive health care. Even contraceptives, they would also give those out as well. Laws cracking down on their ability to do this work really ramped up in the 1900s in favor of more modern hospitals and medical care. But the thing is that they didn't actually build those hospitals where Black people stayed. And so you were left so many people without any legal way to access any kind of healthcare, but also especially no access to abortion, right? And so people still needed that care. So Black midwives continued to provide most abortion services illegally into the 1960s. In the 1950s, overpopulation theories and eugenicist programs became really popular, resulting in the mass sterilization of women and people of color. In response to this, and also in response to concerns over the Black population not being large enough and wanting to gain voting and political power, many Black nationalist groups decried abortion and often decried abortion seekers as a threat to the Black community. Usually they would do this in a kind of overtly misogynistic way, kind of claiming that Black women were destroying the community. In the 1960s, you have Black radicals like Black Panthers, also SNCC. They are invested in abortion access as a kind of extension of meeting the needs of Black people in general, and that reproductive care is of course a part of that. At the same time, the CIA and the FBI are really infiltrating these groups, and they're dividing them intentionally through things like homophobia. A lot of gays and lesbians were pushed out of the Black Panthers in the late 60s, also exacerbating some of the existing paternalism and misogyny present in these groups, pushing like folks who were kind of making really great coalitions out of the movement. And that, of course, affects how we see reproductive access is sometimes separate from what we understand to be Black politics today. Of course, that we know that's not the truth. So here we have a clip from Morgan from the Abortion Fund of Ohio, and that's our legal access fellow. She runs AFO's legal helpline and supports folks getting access to abortion in that way. And then it goes into a clip with Dion from Columbus's Black Queer and Intersectional Collective, otherwise known as Be Quick. I'll say more about that in a second. Play the clip.
A big part of abortion criminalization is criminalizing self-managed abortions, or pregnancy results that don't occur in a medical setting. And so there is a lot, like usually it's when the patient goes to seek healthcare after, is usually when the social workers or hospital staff report to and call the police. And so a lot of the criminalization comes from the medical facilities and personnel that get law enforcement involved when, say, a patient self-managed an abortion but had excessive bleeding afterwards and wanted to go then get that checked out, or they had a stillbirth or a miscarriage and don't know what to do with the remains, and so they either dispose of them or call a hospital or healthcare worker, and that also leads to criminalization. It's really getting cops out of hospitals, getting cops out of these community spaces where people are just trying to access care. Yeah, it honestly almost always or primarily affects Black women, especially young Black women, like Black girls under the age of 18, because they don't have access to medical facilities. They don't even have a car license, or driver's license yet. There is no way to actually really prosecute these cases. They're just doing them to harm Black women and to harm Black people who access abortion. It's basically trying to make it so people who are oppressed can't handle their own medical autonomy in safe and comfortable places for them.
Actions, like, yes, we joke about Karens calling the cops on Black people for doing nothing, but that is a form of policing. That's a form of the surveillance. That's a form of how the police state infects our heads and convinces us that we're agents, we're vigilantes who have to, make sure that people are being criminalized, caged, or killed. And that's our right. And we're doing something good, and this is something that's especially pertinent in repro and abortion spaces, because we see, I think it's like Texas that has really messed up law where vigilantes can report people for getting abortions and then they're criminalized. That is the cops in our head, and the fact that there's state legislation supporting that, it's the clearest example of how the state works, not only to uphold itself and position itself as the best way forward, but also expecting us to become different agents of the state with that and supporting policing.
So that was Dion from Be Quick. I'll read their bio. Dion, they, them is a Black non-binary and neuroexpansive community organizer, writer, climate justice advocate. Okay. They are a core organizer with the Black Queer Intersectional Collective, which is an abolitionist grassroots collective based in Central Ohio by and for Black LGBTQIA plus folks that was founded in 2017. And one part of what they were saying, we're going to hear from Be Quick / Dion again in a bit, but one part of what they were saying was with that Texas law, which kind of encourages folks to go after abortion seekers. One really interesting thing about that, horrifying, terrible thing about that bill is that it actually, in the earliest versions of it, it targets when a person successfully sees a person or catches a person, it actually targets the abortion provider, the doctor, the clinician. And so they are legally responsible. And so that makes, we already know that Black trans people, Black people in general, consistently struggle to access care that is helpful, respectful, willing to listen to them. But when you kind of make the space of the doctor's office an overtly space that's in danger of being criminalized on all levels. Well, it presents a very specific danger to Black, queer, and trans folks. Access issues. Okay, so we can see that pre with the history and post as we are here now today, the fall of Roe v. Wade in 2022, there have been a lot of issues relating to abortion access for Black folks. This has been, of course, just one aspect of the Black maternal and parental health crisis. The political climate really contributes to a lot of like the struggles we face because, of course, in Ohio, there was a 6-week abortion ban in place for only around 90 days. That's a long time, but it's not, to this day. But a lot of people don't have the time, don't have the money to just consistently follow where these cases are going, what the new standard is, and all of that. And capitalism really does deprive us of like time to access our community, deprive us of time in general, so that we can like pay attention to these things and put as much of ourselves in this work as we might want to. I mean, that's an important thing to raise here. There's also lack of access to clinics. As you can see, there are only 9 abortion clinics in the state. And for context on like what that number means for Ohio's history, in 1992, there were 45 abortion clinics in Ohio. Oh, wait a second. Okay. For context, in 1992, there were 45 abortion clinics in Ohio, and by 2014, there were only 12. And of course, now we have 9. And that rapid increase is in part due to targeted restrictions on abortion providers, traps, and these are medically unnecessary restrictions, which really stop medical clinics from being opened and close existing abortion clinics. Okay, so that was a lot. Anyone have any questions on what we've covered so far? Of course, we're a little low on time, but if at any point you can ask questions, all that. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, if you have a pen or a pencil, paper, if you have access to that, or even in a Google Doc, do what you need to do. But I'm going to formally introduce reflections. So this will just be a few minutes to just think about, process some of the stuff that I've just talked about on your own. You can also, if you want, share some of your thoughts in the chat, but no pressure to do that if you don't want to. So the question to reflect on. After talking about the Black history of abortion in the United States, we're going to be talking about some of the Black feminist political advocacy, which tries to combat these ongoing struggles. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about reproductive justice. I guess my question for you all is, what do you know about reproductive justice right now? What have you heard about Black feminism? This is a free write, so no judgment, whatever you have in your mind. So yeah, I'll give a few minutes to work on this. Let me see. Oh, and I'll answer this question from Jasmine. What time period did the clinics decrease from 45 to 9 clinics over a period of 5 years? So sorry. Clinics decreased in 1992. There were 45 abortion clinics in Ohio. In 2014, there were 12. That's a good 2 decades. Yeah. I'm trying to make sure I did that right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sam. Also, with that reflection, I'll also give you all a break from information for a few minutes. So let's regroup at 7:42.
But man, I done been through it all. So I said, I want to tell my story. Cause I never cried or nothing. That's what make them say, that's like my pain. That's basically what that is. That's my battle cry. Think about it. None of us are perfect. We live in an imperfect world. You know, only God could judge me. That's how I look at it. The people that's sitting around pointing their fingers, imagine all the stuff they probably doing. Whether you police officers, doctors, lawyers, presidents, whatever, we got good and bad and everything. You know, we putting people on the pedestal that just a human.
Whoa. Um, Welcome back. Take your time as you're coming back in. Here's a question. How much of the decrease in abortion providing clinics in Ohio is because of funding versus other factors like restrictive legislation, etc.? I want to say I'm not totally sure. I've been mostly looking at like recent history of this, but what I do know is that like as for like recent stuff, there has been this really intentional political push against abortion providers, against abortion clinics. Like there's recently been some stuff with Mike DeWine, like directly targeting clinics in different ways. And so I think that like right now it's kind of with this like legislative push against abortion. But I also I don't want to say that for like that's for sure of the entire history. But that's a really good question. And I think yeah, I'll think more about that. Okay, we're going to move into the next section. So thank you for sharing your reflections in the chat. No pressure to do that, but you know, nice to see where other people are at. Okay, getting free, the road to reproductive justice. Reproductive justice emerges. So to make a long story short, in 1994, 12 Black women leave a pro-choice conference, very disappointed at the lack of like root level analysis. There are people like the Clinton administration is there trying to propose a new healthcare plan, which they hope will get passed. But in order to pass it, they are kind of minimizing reproductive care, which why they would present that at the pro-choice conference, I don't know. But what I do know is that these 12 Black women and many others, these 12 Black women go to a hotel and they discuss, you know, what they're thinking about this. And again, they're saying that the pro-choice movement and the pro-life movement both miss the root of a lot of the issues that they are supposedly trying to fight against. And so they coined this idea of reproductive justice, an intersectional approach to reproductive health and autonomy, addressing the failures of both movements in order to initially support the needs of Black women. To the surprise of its founders, reproductive justice quickly spread from this group and their organizing to a kind of like grassroots approach that's kind of taking over taking the world by storm and creating it's a really great tools for creating like community level change. And I think people are resonating with that. And so when I say reproductive justice, when we say reproductive justice, what do we mean? We have we have Oriaku Njoku from speaking on the podcast No Body Criminalized. She, they pronouns. She's the executive director of the National Network of Abortion Funds, mentioned a bit earlier, and we're going to hear what she has to say on this.
It's important to note too what we're talking about when we're saying reproductive justice. Something I've noticed over the years in doing this work is that there's been this like whitewashing of reproductive justice, this co-opting of reproductive justice in a way that it has lost the radical and bold nature of what the 12 founding mothers of reproductive justice intended when they decided to coin that phrase, you know? When we're talking about reproductive justice, it's really acknowledging the human right to bodily autonomy. Also, whether to be a parent, not to be a parent, raise your children or your families in safe and sustainable communities, this is all part of it. Talking about this work with a reproductive justice lens is inherently intersectional, meaning you can't just think about choice or abortion on this like choice binary. It really is like, what are all the things that impact the choices that we make every day? Because as Audre Lorde says, we do not live single issue lives. And so thinking about how race and gender and the economy and your zip code and your access to food and global warming or climate change, all of these things have an impact on why people make the choices that they make. I think the places where we are able to have these really great wins and success is when our groups are working together within using the reproductive justice framework or lens to guide the way the work is happening. We're able to make connections with our work and other work that is happening outside of the repro movement. So, working with folks who are doing Fight for 15, working with folks who are doing things around childcare, working with people who are doing work around Medicaid expansion, the working with people, not working for people, because we have acknowledged that this is for us. Like, we live here too. The activists are like, we want it for us and we want it for everyone in our community.
So going off of that, reproductive justice is a movement which, by its like nature as a Black feminist framework, carries a heavy load. It's meant to fill in the gaps left by the government, gaps left by activists or political figures who want to assimilate or compromise on the freedom and autonomy of all people. Usually, when we talk about reproductive justice, it starts with three pillars. The first pillar being the right to have children, the right going into the right not to have children, and finally, not finally, but third, the right to nurture the children we have in safe and healthy environments. But of course, reproductive justice cannot afford to be stagnant. And while these four pillars are consistent throughout most, if not all, reproductive justice activism, they're usually expanded and adapted depending on who needs them. While the movement started for Black women, it expanded to meet the needs of women and people of color more broadly. For instance, in addition to what we discussed already, many Indigenous activists use art reproductive justice to fight for land rights. Others have used it to fight for equitable treatment to those who are immigrating or in the process of immigrating. And queer people specifically have expanded to include sexual justice. Kimala Price writes on how, quotes, the last 2 decades of queer organizing included an expansion of the definition of reproductive justice to include sexual justice, which encompasses, among many things, the right to pleasure, consensual sexuality, the right to gender identity and expression, and the freedom to form the relationships and families of one's choosing. That's really important. So Black people, Black queer people have already been thinking through the lens of reproductive justice. With or without that name, which came about in the 90s, we know that our struggles are intertwined and we know that we have to work inside and outside of the state to get our needs met. I think about STAR, the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. This is Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera's group, active in the early 1970s. They, in addition to doing public-facing political advocacy for those who had been largely left behind by the queer rights movement, also provided shelter to homeless LGBT youth and trans youth who were often also sex workers. While it's said in some places to be the first LGBT youth shelter in North America, I think it's actually really hard to say that for sure, because when looking at the history of Black queer people specifically, a lot of people see that need and are trying similar projects. I think in just one example of this, about Ruth Ellis, who in the 1940s also recognized that Black queer people had almost no spaces in the existing queer scene and the existing Black scene. And so she and her life partner decided to make their home a meeting place and shelter for people in Detroit, right? And so while neither of these groups had or used the language of reproductive justice, these pillars of sexual justice and how we now understand bodily autonomy are in part inspired by their work. In the early 2000s, when it came time for people like Carmen Vasquez, a founder of Cause in Common, a national coalition of LGBT liberation and reproductive justice activists to build that kind of specific coalition, it became all the more apparent that this was shared work. And while these stories are really notable and these individuals they talk about are really great, when looking at what Black queer history we know, stories like these are not rare. When you're facing multiple levels of oppression, people do somewhat consistently fight back and make their own spaces with and for each other. And so sexual justice is one of those major points of connection. In other words, reproductive justice is about building and sustaining communities, which Black queer people have already been doing. I hope it's clear that this is less of like an ask for like Black queer people, please do reproductive justice. We need this so bad. It's actually more about recognizing how reproductive justice is already a part of our history and building upon that. Any questions? Oh, ooh, I saw. Oh, okay. One question was answered. Okay, very cool. And any other questions at them in that tab? We're going to go into another reflection. Barrel, barrel. So we know what we're fighting against. We know the sinister, the evil, but what are we fighting for? I want to ask, what would a future free of these issues look like? What would freedom, reproductive justice look like for you? I'm going to very quickly read Land of the Free by Ben Passmore before we go into a break where you can all decompress. After decades of conflict in New America, the Republic of New Africa was born in the former southern states of 1968. The nation's first president, Malcolm X, announced the Free Black Nations annexation backed by his coalition of Black Panthers, Pan-Africanists, Black Socialists, and Anarchados, who'd waged a guerrilla campaign against the empire. New Africans could finally breathe the fresh air of home. They shared it with each other, knowing there was always more. And then the character wakes up in a jail cell and says, I swear it wasn't a dream. Or is this life a nightmare I have to wake up from? That was Ben Passmore, wonderful Black anarchist artist. Yeah, so reflect on those things. I will see you all back in like 2-ish minutes, maybe 7:57.
That big body boy, you're bound to win. That armor in your mouth, gonna shine. Your wrist talking, boy, it's only time. Put the incense on, cover up the smell. And if your voice goes down, I know you never tell. You're a superstar. You're a superstar. Always shining in the night. And your skin glowing in the moonlight. The streets say you're a king. The world says you're a failure. And your mother is a queen. But damn, she always tells you you gon' end up like your daddy. But damn, that nigga fresh. So if it all comes out to plan, you gon' end up like the best. You say, look on the TV. They all want to be me. For nothing, whatever it's worth is something. Ain't no apologizing for all of the things you want. So if dreams only go so far, they'll come to where you are. Candy red things gonna spin with that big body boy. put the incense on, cover up the smell, and if your voice goes down, I know you never tell. You're a superstar. You're a superstar. Always shining in the night, in your skin, flowing in the moonlight.
Okay, we're gonna get started in just a few seconds. What now? Black queer liberation. Here we are in the future, perhaps. Okay, so kind of wrap up. We're unfortunately nearing the end. Last 30 minutes of this workshop, but we're gonna get into some more of the practical side of taking this history, taking this knowledge, and doing things with it. So just to start, one of the ways that I like to think about like queer reproductive justice and a future for Black queer people is based on my understanding of Black queer liberation as a recognition of Black queerness as a source of both strength and power. Since the beginning, Black queer people have been finding ways to exist within and around systems that seek to oppress us. And so we're going to talk about what reinforcing Black self-determination and autonomy might look like, what that entails, what work we have to do to get there. So to start this conversation off right, we're going to be talking to two of oh, wait a second, sorry. Two of AFO's wonderful abortion storytellers. If you haven't heard, abortion storytelling is a very important tool for not only helping people understand what abortion access looks like, but also for building community. First, we're going to be talking to Simone, who you all will be able to see in just a second. Okay, woohoo. Hello.
Hi.
Okay, I'm gonna introduce you. First up, we have Simone. Simone is an abortion storyteller, reproductive justice activist from Indianapolis, Indiana. Since 2018, she has proudly shared her abortion story at the individual and organizational level, including with Planned Parenthood. Simone joined Abortion Fund Ohio as a patient resource coordinator in August of 2022. Prior to AFO, Simone worked as a care professional and nursing assistant, assisting folks with tasks for independent living and crisis intervention. I want to thank you so much for being here. And I'll get right into our first question. We've heard your name, we've heard what you do, but what did abortion access look like for you?
Yeah, so I live in Indiana, even though I work for the Abortion Fund of Ohio. I am a Hoosier. Okay, I was born and raised here in Indiana. So I had my abortion in 2016. So it was right after Mike Pence's era. It was difficult as far as like the barriers and things. I was a high school student, or I was a college student, freshman at a high school, and I had no car. I worked at a warehouse, and I was making like $9.50 an hour. So, depending on my partner at the time, who was not very supportive, it was hard to get there on the first appointment. And then when I found out that there was a waiting period of 24 hours, I was just like, well, I took off of work for this, and I'm gonna have to take off another day of work. And I can't afford this in the first place. So it was just a back and forth of like trying to find funds in the state. The Hoosier Abortion Fund actually helped me fund my abortion. Shout out to them. But it actually ended up being 6 weeks between my first appointment and the time that I actually got my surgical procedure done. So it was a rough and tumble at that time. It still is, obviously, in Indiana now. It's even harder, actually. Like, you can't go up to 11 weeks like I did. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to ask about your experience as an abortion advocate. Um, what has been your experience hearing narratives about abortion? I also want to ask, like, what are common misconceptions that you hear in community?
Yes. So sharing my abortion story has been like so extremely liberating, and not only for myself, but for the people around me. I've had dear friends and their family members, older Black women in their families share like, "Oh, I wish somebody like you was around when I had my abortion, because nobody was talking about it. Like, it was just something you did and you never talked about it for the rest of your life." And I would go to Black Expo and table sometimes for different organizations. And just seeing all of the aunties and the cousins and everybody, different ages, different lifestyles, coming to the table and like talking to me about like, I had an abortion, or my mom had an abortion, my sister had an abortion, and just hearing everybody's experiences was so eye-opening. I'm like, we need to be talking about this more. So yeah, like, talking about abortion with Black people is, it's like the stigmas are there. But for me, I've dealt with my own personal stigma, like personally. So I have a little bit more space to have the tougher conversations around like Black sexuality and what that means for people who have abortion and how we're viewed in our community. But I love talking to Black people about abortions. I love it.
I'm so glad. Me too. I want to ask you, what's up with multiple abortion stigma? Where does that kind of stigma show up and impact people? We're gonna wait a second so that we can make sure the ASMR interpreter is visible on the screen.
So while it lets me spotlight up to 2 people at a time, right
Oh,
now
I can be unspotlighted if that helps.
we also have, I just added our friends as under the interpretation button, so you will have to click the little globe at the bottom now while we have our storytellers on. Thanks for being flexible, friend.
So at the bottom of the screen, there's a little globe. I think you just heard Sam say this, but I clicked it. I can now see the ASL interpreter. Please let us know if that does not work. And I'll repeat the question. What's up with multiple abortion stigma? Where does kind of stigma show up and how does it impact people?
So with having multiple abortions, like, a lot of the things that I hear is people talk about abortion as like a lesson, like that you need to learn from. And you don't do it again. And if you do it again, like, you're careless. And it's like, there are a plethora of reasons why you would want or need multiple abortions. One of the main ones for myself, I've not had multiple abortions, but I would get another one because I don't want to be pregnant right now. I don't want kids right now. And that's valid. And there are a million other reasons why people would get multiple abortions. And that just, I think, comes from like the kind of like the purity culture that we have in our communities, and like how it's so hush hush, like having one abortion already. And like I said, it's like it's something that you have to learn from, quote unquote, and you just don't do it again.
And I want to ask you, we're nearing the end of our time together, but I want to ask you one final question of what has been your experience in supporting trans folks accessing care? How can reproductive justice advocates show up better for trans folks?
Yes, I take it as like a cisgendered woman. It's my job to learn how to become like I have to learn the language of being inclusive. Like I have to learn how to be inclusive. It's not anybody else's job to educate me. So the way I go into my work and knowing that I will encounter trans people and people who are non-binary and people of all different sexualities and gender identities, I go into it and I don't talk about abortion as a issue that only affects women. Just off jump, I say people who have abortions. When I'm talking to my lovely patients, like I don't assume that I'm talking to a woman on the other end of the line. I know it can be weird for some people, like when I ask them their pronouns, because I've encountered a lot of patients who are like, well, I'm obviously, you know what I'm saying, but it's like we just have to keep doing it. We have to do it and we have to hold each other accountable for doing it. And that's how I show up and try to be as inclusive and be an ally for trans people. I know I'm running out of time here.
You were just fine.
When I was a nursing assistant, I encountered a patient that was trans, and the nurses that were on staff were like constantly dead naming this patient, and the patient was also deaf. And so like I just didn't understand how they could be so nasty in that way. I'm like, that they can't hear you and you're gossiping about them in their face. And I did get those people fired from that job, but like that's what I mean. Like you're not gonna do that. Like you can't do that. And my job as a person who has privilege as a cisgendered woman was to correct those people on their behalf and stand in front of them when they're getting harmed. So yeah, I think it's really important just to, be there for people.
Thank you so much. Um, you know, I've gained so much from this experience. I know people in the chat are appreciating it as well. We're going to transition into talking to Taryn. Thank you again. Hello.
Hello.
So now we're going to talk to Taryn. Taryn Hollyman, she, her, is a dynamic reproductive justice organizer, abortion storyteller, and the program manager for the Abortion Fund of Ohio. Before joining AFO, Taryn worked as an organizing fellow and regional field manager for Planned Parenthood of Southwest Ohio, working directly with patients, volunteers, and advocates. Hi. To get started, I want to ask, what did abortion access look like for you?
Yeah, so I had both of my abortions in 2019, which was during the time where the 6-week ban was, it was in effect for those 6 weeks, but it was all I knew is that it was a thing. And I was, not too familiar with repro before that. So I remember immediately as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I was like, can I even get an abortion in Ohio? I was in school in Athens, and I didn't have a vehicle. The closest abortion clinic was in Columbus, which was about an hour and a half away. But I'm from Cincinnati, and I wanted to be able to hopefully try to access care down there. I was fortunate enough to have amazing friends around me who did, have a car, and she helped me get home and make it to my appointments. But that in and of itself, getting there, I had no idea at first what was going to happen. Then of course we have this waiting period in Ohio, and I had to wait over a month in between my first appointment and second appointment. And I was working a lot. It was the summertime when I had my first one, and I was working a lot. And I still wasn't making enough to nearly cover, this cost. Like I was, able to get some funding with from the National Abortion Federation, but I was like, it was panic. It was really panic the whole time. And also because I had to rely on so many different people to help me in accessing care, which I must say I'm very appreciative that that was even something, you know, I was able to do. I also felt like I I ended up subjecting myself to a lot more stigma and a lot more harmful things than I would have liked to. But I didn't, of course, I didn't know. I didn't know that at that time. And so it was from the logistics of actually accessing the abortion to just, you know, some of the many things that kind of came up along the way. It was a lot more of a challenge than it ever should have been.
Definitely, definitely. And I want to ask on that abortion stigma note, how can people fight abortion stigma?
Yeah, so one that like this training, this workshop, just having these conversations with each other within our communities and saying abortion, right? Like, you know, a lot you might have heard this before, but people who are antis for whatever reason, they say abortion so much more than folks who are pro-abortion. We need to be saying it. It needs to be something that, you know, becomes more normalized in conversation, because when we talk about it, we not only are able to normalize it and you know, get more dialogue going, but we can share resources and we can, you know, things can become, you know, more of common knowledge. And I definitely think it comes down to, of course, talking about it, and discussing it with the ones we love, and just, you know, making it a point to try to destigmatize when we can. And when we, you know, making destigmatization putting that at the forefront when we are having conversations like this.
Hmm. And this is a big question, but I want to ask you this as we get close to time, because I think it could be, you know, what does the future of abortion advocacy look like? What does the future of this work look like? Yeah.
Yes. Ooh, it does not end. So of course, you know, we know here in Ohio, issue 1 has passed, but there is no laws don't matter without access, right? You know, as we can see, one of the first thing I always think of is this 24-hour, you know, waiting period. The fact that not only do you have to make time for one appointment, but two, and that can, you know, just be, there's so many barriers that can come into play with that. Funding. I think that, you know, not abortion clinics, yes, but also abortion funds. We need resources, and money needs to be given. We need money. They're very expensive. So I think definitely more clinics. We need more clinics. We need so much more resources, really. But also I think hand in hand with that is, you know, simultaneously that destigmatization work. Because again, when we talk about it, when we make it something that folks feel more comfortable sharing about, and it becomes more a part of our everyday, not everyday conversations, who knows, but I hope so. Once that happens, you know, I think that changes are more likely to happen. And, you know, I definitely think that I'm so grateful. I'm definitely glad that issue 1 did pass, but there's just so much more work to be done. I think access is going to be, you know, is a huge focus, access and destigmatization.
Thank you so much. Um, powerful, powerful word. Thank you so much. Um, yeah, thank you so much. Also, everyone give a virtual round of applause for our amazing abortion storytellers. However you can. Um, thank you so much. We're gonna get back into the slides before we close out. All right. So next steps. Reproductive justice, one of the most important parts of it is that it is grassroots, it's community-based, which means that you as a member of some community can use this framework to impact people in your community. It really comes down to finding your place in any kind of abortion support work. And we're going to talk about this, any kind of support work in general. We're going to talk about this from that abortion angle. So when we're talking about increasing access to abortion, especially when we're talking about when we know that the state is not on our side, when we know that antis are not on our side. Oh, no, ASL, 1 second. Oh, wait a minute. Something I have to do. But can you see now? Okay, great. I'll share the sentence over. So when we're talking about increasing access to abortion, we're usually talking about attempts to build networks of care for each other, especially when we know that that legislation is not on our side, even when it is. Oh, okay. Well, I think we're both back. Okay, great. Sorry for delaying that. We're talking about building networks of care for each other when the systems are not working for us, right? And so we're going to hear from Dion from Be Quick once again.
And we need community care, because again, care, healing, getting our needs met, none of that is done in isolation. And as a collective, we're experiencing extreme levels of collective grief and confusion. Year 4, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and having been abandoned by the government in it. Community care means showing up for one another, and like people, like individuals in our community showing up for one another and committing ourselves to that in a world where our elected officials don't, who say that they represent the people, do not. In a world where our healthcare systems fail us and serve as additional sites of violence for Black queer people. In a world where, people are demonized for drug use or criminalized for participating in the survival economy. Like community care holds space for all of this and says that people are still deserving of love and care and healing and resourcing. Part of community care is being in community. And for the people within our reach, showing up for them and helping them get their basic needs met, and developing networks where we can be interdependent, we can show up for one another, we can trade, you can do this, I can do this. How can we work together? And doing all of this outside of the state. Um, Community care centers those who are most marginalized amongst us within our communities, like Black, queer, trans people, people who are disabled, poor people, and really cultivating accessibility where the most marginalized people amongst us can access resources and care and safety.
So on that note, for many, like one aspect of this is just one of many aspects of kind of developing community care and community autonomy. For many Black queer people, having access to a Black midwife or doula is an ideal way to access a lot of kinds of reproductive care. For birth, midwives is a person who can help someone give birth, and a doula can ensure that someone going into a clinic has their birth plan followed and they're respected at all times. And in the same way, we have abortion doulas, which many doulas are full spectrum, which means that they can cover any outcome of a pregnancy. But some people specifically are right now, especially, are working on supporting people access abortion care, supporting people through what that abortion experience is like, and kind of building community in that way. And we know that like historically, Black people have been pushed out of providing this kind of care, but especially now, people have a really big, like reinvigorated interest in this. And groups like national groups like the National Black Doula Association and Roots Reproductive Justice on a local level, and so many others are kind of taking up the mantle on making sure that people can get the training that they need, people can get the support that they need, because doulas need community too, midwives need community too. And so the strategy of providing community care in this way has worked well for a lot of groups. A lot of what we've talked about here has been kind of skimmed over, but in the follow up, we're going to provide a lot of resources relating to that kind of thing. Getting practical. As for applying this information, That, of course, is up to you. It's up to you to make that commitment, knowing what you can commit. But here are some starting tips. To start, give money. Woohoo! If you have a disposable income, try and commit maybe 10%, maybe 5% of it to giving people who need it. Please think critically about who you're giving your money to. We are in giving season, as someone was saying in the chat. So every nonprofit, politician, and their mother will try and get your dollars, but please always ask questions about where the money is going to. If you're ever concerned or unsure about where the money is going, you can always ask if you're in an in-person event or send an email. For instance, if you asked Sam at the Abortion Fund of Ohio for, by chance, what percentage of donations actually go to funding abortions? She would reply, 100% of donations go to direct aid for people accessing abortions. And ideally, you'd say, amazing, here's a bunch of money for abortions, and then everyone would be like, woohoo, yippee. It's all important to check up on that stuff. Also, please try not to be afraid of giving directly to individuals who need it, especially people in your community. Yeah, that's what I'll say on that. Giving time, depending on the situation, you can give time to people or organizations. People need help more than ever, especially after kind of the initial fanfare of the fall of Roe has died down. So looking into organizations in your community and asking, how can I help out? Finding out what you have the time and energy to do is actually a really important part of this. And we've discussed fighting stigma quite a bit, so we aren't going to go into too much detail, but to keep things brief, if you are a person who is able to say abortion, who's able to speak out about restrictions on access, then you have the ability to become what I want to call the abortion friend, which means that when someone needs access to like reproductive health care, they know that they can go to you. They know that they can go to someone to have that need met instead of feeling ashamed and not being able to know where to go. That kind of thing really does build community. And big fundraising event coming up. So if you're looking for a place to give money, please. Okay, so that about wraps it up. Again, if you have more questions, if you have more thoughts, all that, please share them in the appropriate channels. After today, we're going to send a link to this post-event survey. If you can scan the QR code, please do. It's really helpful for knowing what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want more of. We're also going to be sharing all the sources and a kind of resource list for kind of like looking further into a lot of the things that we talked about. So yeah, I want to thank Abortion Fund of Ohio. I want to thank Taryn, Simone, Sam, Sierra, and of course I want to thank the Black Queer and Sexual Collective. Also send funds their way as well, and Dion specifically. And thank you so much. Any other questions, of course, in the chat?
Lotus, please drop your Venmo. The people have asked.
The people are
begging.
The people are speaking.
Okay. I'll do that. Also, can you play the tunes as I find that information? Oh.
That's what make my life complete, knowing that it's a higher being, a higher power, knowing that these people have paid their way. You know, our great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers that came here, they found some kind of way to make the rhythm, you know, and they kept rhythm no matter what.
Now, we come here as slaves, but we going out as royalty,
and able to show that we are truly the chosen one.
Right. Just want to uplift again that Lotus just dropped his little Venmo moment. I just lost it in the thank yous of the chat. And I will go ahead and copy that in our follow-up email as well. Also just want to uplift that Lotus has done so much amazing work on this workshop and with us this month. And please do give him a call, well, an email rather, for all of your lovely workshopping needs and just lots of love.
Thank you all so much. Oh, I feel like I said this, but thank you all so much again for coming. I appreciate you all. I hope you all have a really wonderful night. Hope something about this resonated with you. Fill out that form if you can. Thank you. Heart emoji. Thank you.